The Princess's Man 5. Alicia was still blushing as she and Elon walked up to where Gotro and Will had just finished their most recent match. Both men had bruises on their bodies from where direct blows had been landed. Around them, many soldiers, and even Alicia's brother Kale, clamored for the next round of combat. Alicia watched as both Will and his grandfather begged off fighting them, gesturing to Alicia and Elon as an excuse. Elon waved her hand at her husband and grandson once they had gotten dressed, and Alicia watched the sweat, dirt, and bruises vanish from their bodies and clothes. "That's a convenient spell," Alicia said, eyeing Will's chest as he finished doing up the laces of his shirt. "It is," Elon said. "Tell me, Alicia, do you have any talent for magic?" "The court wizards say that I don't. They say I have the ability, but it is not prominent," Alicia said. "Why do you ask, Elon?" "Oh, human wizards seem to think that they are the authorities on magic. Give me your hand, girl," Elon said, taking the offered hand of Alicia into her hands. Elon closed her eyes and Alicia could feel power flow through her as the old woman spoke. "I ask because if you have some magic abilities, there are some simple spells that humans don't know that I can teach you, should you ever need to defend yourself and Will is not around." Elon's brow wrinkled. "Deep breath, girl." Alicia took a deep breath and suddenly she felt something burst inside her. "What did you do to me?" Alicia said in surprise as Elon released her hands. "I tried to force the pathways in the body that allow magic to be cast to open up more. It did not work," Elon said. "You can probably use simple cleaning spells, and maybe a very low-tier healing spell using human magic. However, if you convince Will to teach you some elvish magic, you might be able to cast a few middle-tier spells as the elvish spells are highly refined and efficient." "Thank you," Alicia said, not understanding most of what she was talking about, but making a mental note to ask Will about it later. She looked back to see Will talking with Kale, and Gotro packing a new bowl of half-leaf as the crowd that had gathered began to disperse. "Now, we should get back to trying to get your father to agree to send you and Will on the mission that we need help with," Elon said. "Yes, though I am curious why you need help from us with forming an alliance between whoever these beings are and yourselves. And that is another thing. What race are the beings that inhabit this land that you are trying to align yourself with?" Alicia said as Elon walked with her. Gotro and Will followed behind as they all made their way into the castle. "We need your help because we would like to have you form an alliance with them as well. It will make them feel better. As to who they are, well, let's wait and we'll tell you and your father all at once." About an hour later, thanks to the king insisting that they all eat with him before any business was conducted, Alicia, Will, Elon, Gotro, and the king and queen were seated around a table to discuss the mission. "We would very much like it if we could send both Will and Alicia to act as an ambassadorial team to the small country that has been speaking with us," Gotro said. Elon nodded. "We think that it would be much better for both of our countries if we could make a peace agreement at the very least, if not a trade agreement." The king looked confused. "I am still confused as to who these people are and why you feel so strongly about this." Gotro looked at the king. "The beings who have established this small country are Grenga." That caused a sharp intake of breath. The Grenga are a race with no solid form. They appeared as a cloud of black mist. Though they could take the forms of other races, they could only do so for a short period of time. The other shocking part of this is that the Grenga were typically some of the evilest and most aggressive creatures ever. What made this so valuable an opportunity is the innate magic that the Grenga held that allowed them to fabricate any desired non-magical object out of the dirt. It is one of the reasons that the Grenga are so hard to fight. You think you have disarmed one and then it shifts to a different form and materializes a new sword out of some of the dirt it is standing on. This combination of attitude, magic, and ability was also why Grenga were generally hunted on sight, as they were technically magical beasts, rather than sentient beings. "How many are there in this, what is it, a small kingdom?" the king asked after he had regained his composure. "Near as we can tell, there are close to 20,000 in the one city they have constructed," Elon said. "Why haven't they begun killing?" the king pondered out loud. "That's what I wanted to know when we first heard of this," Gotro said, "so Elon and 20 of our best warriors went to make contact. Apparently, the Grenga that we have encountered are part of a highly fanatical military belonging to the ruling class. This Grenga society apparently resides between planes of existence. The Grenga that are here are a group that have existed on the fringes of that larger society. Apparently, there has been a bit of a regime change in Grenga politics and the new leader gave them a choice: integrate into the society or move into this plane, as it is supposedly very difficult for them to live here. So these Grenga are peaceful and have been banished here to live out their lives? The king said, sounding as if he were mulling it over. But how could they have built a city so quickly? That is one of the things we want to know. Elon said. We hope to establish a trade relationship with them so that we can learn how to use their methods, or if it's something to with their abilities, we can at least hire the Grenga. These are all good points, and I would assume that you are wanting to send Alicia, but who would represent the Gobran? The king asked. We were hoping that we could let Will fill that role, as he will be going anyways. Elon said. And before you raise any objections, part of his training when he lived with us was diplomacy and espionage, so he is fully capable of performing these duties. May I ask what Will was meant to be to the Gobran? Alicia asked, wondering at the breadth and depth of Will's training. Will was, and is, meant to be the next leader of the collective. Gotro said with pride in his voice. Very well, I am content that they go, so long as I can send one other. The king said, and then glanced over his shoulder to where Sir Balfour stood by the door. Sir Balfour, if you would, I ask that you accompany the princess and her man on this diplomatic venture. Of course, Your Highness. Sir Balfour said, bowing slightly from his position. I would ask that they travel with you back to the collective and then go on their own from there. The king said, turning to look at Elon and Gotro. Of course. Elon said, smiling. Very well, it is decided then. The king said. Knowing the Gobran, you probably want to leave tonight? Elon and Gotro nodded. Very well, said the king, prepare a grand lunch at least so that you may travel well fed. The rest of the morning was spent packing by Will and Alicia. Alicia wanted to take a lot of stuff. And Will was against it. Princess, I'm sorry, but I think it is not wise to bring 7 dresses from a logistical standpoint. Will said, his frustration growing. He would protect her, but he would not carry chests of clothing from here to the Gobran. And I am telling you that it is needed. Alicia said back. And how many times do I have to remind you that you don't need to call me anything other than my name? Elon stepped into the princess's room. Will, why don't you worry about yourself and let me help the princess? Will simply nodded and left to take his single bag to the area where the Gobran's party was assembling. Now then, though Will is right to a certain extent, I know that you are right as well, so let's get you packed, and then I can do something about the quantity or weight once we get on the road. Elon said, and Alicia thanked her. Don't forget that it will just be you, Will, and that captain, so feel free to order the captain to stay behind in the Gobran so you can snuggle up to Will. Alicia blushed and Elon laughed. Why is it that you are so desperate for me to make a move on Will? Alicia asked. We can talk about that later, for now just know that I think you are an excellent match for Will. Elon said, and then chatted about benign things until they had finished packing. An hour later they were eating a grand lunch, and 2 hours after that they were on the road. Alicia looked around as the cart that she was seated on with Elon passed through the outermost gates of the city. Elon noticed and spoke. You nervous, Alicia? Not nervous, just curious. I have done diplomatic service for my father before, but never outside the kingdom. And now my father agrees to send me away to meet with a group of beings who as far as we know are only ever aggressive. Alicia said. It's just interesting to me is all. And it will have been the farthest I have ever been from home. Well, don't worry about that, as long as Will is the princess's man, you are more than welcome to the Gobran any time you want. Elon said. Alicia smiled and looked ahead at where Will walked alone. Will was scanning the horizon. He knew that at the moment, between himself, his grandmother, his grandfather, and the others in their party, they were arguably the strongest military force for several hundred miles. But something didn't sit right. Will was worried. He looked back at Alicia and his grandmother, hoping to draw strength, but instead found despair. Well, time to soldier on. Will said. He looked once more at Alicia and resolved then and there that nothing would hurt her. Here's to hoping that my gut is wrong. The Princess's Man 6. Several hours had passed since the party had headed for the Gobran, and despite the almost jovial attitude of the others, Will could not shake the feeling that something was incredibly wrong, and it must have shown on his face. What's wrong, Will? Alicia asked. Gotro and Elon looked back as well. I don't know. I have a bad feeling, and it's been with me since we left the castle. Will explained. Elon and Gotro looked at each other and then began speaking to the Drati captain, who rushed off to give orders to the others. Elon asked Will a question. Is there a direction to it? When we left the kingdom, it was ahead of us, but now I feel like there is something bad all around. I think, Will stopped speaking as he moved inhumanly fast, snatching a knife from the air just inches from Alicia's face. Gobran. Dem check knock. Gotro bellowed out, and more than 30 Drati suddenly disengaged their innate invisibility, surprising Alicia with their numbers. The Drati were encircling Will, Alicia, Ilon, and Gotro. What? Why did they try to kill me? Alicia said, somewhat in shock with everything going on. Look. Gotro said, a tone of rage in his voice. The filthy bastards. What are they? Alicia asked, taking note of the humans covered in strange bones. They are hunters. Will said. They typically come from the east to hunt either bounties or magical beasts. But these are a special kind of hunter. They call themselves elf slayers. Elon said with a sad note in her voice. They believe that humans are the rightful rulers of the world and that elves of any kind are simply a poor mockery of humans. The armor that they wear is of elves that they have killed. This particular group hunts Gilshire-Ibram. We have dealt with them before. They know that I am the last, so they do not give up. Alicia looked closer at the humans and realized the bones that they were wearing were composed of the same crystalline stuff that Elon's nails had looked to be made of. Will spoke then. Yiwa, please look after Alicia for a moment. Elon nodded as one of the only female Drati in the group quietly set out 2 chairs and began to pour water into a cup for both Alicia and Elon. Alicia took a seat and looked around in confusion. Elon, I am sorry, but I am confused. Aren't you going to help them? No, as a matter of fact, if I were to help them, it would be more of a hindrance than a help. Elon said as she and Alicia watched Gotro begin chanting. Suddenly he and Will both seemed to flush a bright red across all their exposed skin. Orcish blood rage? Alicia said with slight fear in her tone. Yes, it is a strange thing to see, isn't it, a human with that tint? Elon said with a smile. But long story short, if you treat the bones of one of my people in a special way, they become shields against magic, taking all magic cast at them and absorbing it in a way that anyone with magical talent can tap into the magic and cast it right back at them. On the other hand, bones with the right runes can be used to great effect in a wide variety of ways. Alicia wanted to ask more questions, but she was too engrossed in watching the enraged Will and Gotro charge at the group of 7 humans covered in bones. As she watched, Will leaped forward the last 10 feet and grabbed the face of 2 of the hunters and then slammed them downwards with sickening cracks. To Will's left, Gotro had pulled up short and was engaging 3 of the humans at once and quite effectively driving them back. The 2 remaining hunters had stepped away from Will and raised their hands, chanting. The air seemed to pulse violently around Will, and while it did no damage to him, it did prevent him from moving. Will noticed something and smiled, pointing to the air behind the 2. They laughed and ignored him until the first one died, and the Drati captain dropped his invisibility. Will grabbed the remaining caster and quickly incapacitated him with a chokehold. Sir Balefur spoke then for the first time since leaving the castle. The Gobran is scary. It's bad enough that I don't think I could do anything to stop Will if I needed to, but these Drati are sneaky. I thought you only brought 10 of them. Elon looked up to where Sir Balefur was standing back to the left of the princess. We did, these others waited outside the castle in the city, so don't feel too bad. I am sure that if you want, we can find an Ogdashi for you to train under. You could stay at the Gobran while Will and Alicia do what they must to fulfill the obligations that they have. That would give you plenty of time to pick up some new skills. I thank you for the invitation. Sir Balefur said, eyes widening. Few, if any, ever trained with the Gobran Ogdashi without taking some form of a magical vow of fealty to the Gobran. But I don't think that I should abandon my duties. Sir Balefur was interrupted by Alicia, who spoke up after a meaningful look from Elon. Nonsense, as you know, Will is the primary person responsible for me. You could serve my father better by learning as much as you can to take it back to the kingdom. You would make it worth his while, wouldn't you, Elon? Alicia said with a look that was a mix of hopeful and scared, as she was wondering how Elon could have such a relaxed conversation while her husband and grandson fought. Oh, of course. Elon said, turning to speak with Sir Balefur, but Alicia ignored the conversation, turning her attention back to the finish of the fight that was happening. Out where Alicia was looking, Will, Gotro, and the Drati captain had each taken one of the melee fighters that had initially engaged Gotro. The Drati captain killed his opponent quickly with the slash of a sword across the throat. Will's opponent succumbed as well under the frighteningly rapid assault of blows that poured forth from Will. Gotro subdued his opponent without killing them. Gotro waved his hand and said something. Alicia could only guess that it dispelled the spell that was invoking battle rage as Will's flesh faded back to its normal pinkish hue. Will and the Draytee captain quickly and efficiently stripped the bones, weapons, and equipment from the bodies of the hunters, tossing the bodies in a pile that Elon set ablaze with a wave of her hand. The final hunter, the only survivor, watched in horror as all this happened. How? The hunter stammered, looking from Will to Elon and then Gotro. He still does not inform you lot what it is that you are hunting. Elon said to the hunter. Who would tell us? And what do you mean what we are hunting? The hunter stammered out. The man who started the elf slayers, the one who trains you all and shows you how to fashion the bones of my dead brethren into these misguided things. I believe that you call him father, master, or something equally deluded. The tone of Elon's voice spoke to a deep hatred of this person. You know of father? The hunter said. Ha! Elon said, know of him? I trained him. I showed him the ways to fashion bones into something more. He hates elves because he hates that he has learned so much from us. He hates me in particular because he realized that he was inferior. You lie, filthy elf. The hunter snarled. Watch your tongue, or I will cut it from your head. Gotro snarled with equal aggression. I lie. Yes, sometimes I do, and I wish that I had never shown that simpering man the things I did. Elon seemed to lose herself in thought for a moment before she turned back to the hunter. If you are so confident, go, return to father and ask him about me. Tell him that Elon of the Gobran claimed to have taught him everything that he knows of magic. But I warn you, young man, he will kill you. If you have faith that I am wrong, by all means, go to him and declaim me to him. But if you think that I am right, well, I would take this opportunity to start life anew. As Elon spoke, the Draytee holding the young man removed the bones he was wearing and took all his weapons. And then they dropped his arms, letting him turn and leave. I am done with this trip. How far from the Elfstones are we? Elon asked. Not far, ma'am. The Draytee captain said and took a small bag that expanded and began filling it with the bones and equipment of the hunters before shrinking it back down and returning it to his pocket. They traveled in silence for another hour despite the questions burning in Alicia's mind. Then they approached something that Alicia had heard of, the Elfstones. What she had read of them and what others had said did very little to aptly describe the massive stones. Each stone was roughly 15 feet tall, 2 feet thick, and 5 feet wide. Each and every one of them was clearer than the finest glass. The scholars who had studied them believed the circles of stones to be places of worship for an ancient race. Alicia counted the stones. There were 47 of the imposing monoliths in a nearly perfect circle. Inset into each of the stones was a small white circle ranging from less than a finger's width in diameter to almost a full foot in diameter. The ground inside the stones was hard-packed sand that was as black as midnight. Will hesitated to step into the circle. What's wrong, Will? Alicia asked. I just hate the reaction that happens when I enter the Elfstones. Will said before ushering Alicia to go with Gotro as Will and Elon waited outside. After everyone else had entered the stones, Elon entered, and the stones seemed to glow. The sand inside the stones seemed to pull towards Elon, but she walked normally. When Will entered the stones, the illusion was stripped away from himself, as well as Elon. Any other magic was cancelled. Where there had been about 20 Draytee, every single one who was still invisible was suddenly visible. The stones all seemed to be trying to shift themselves towards Will. As Alicia watched, Will spoke to her. This is going to be scary, but just breathe, and you will be fine. What will be scary? Alicia asked, walking with Will towards a clear stone in the center that she had not noticed before. As soon as Will set foot on the stone, the black sand rose around the legs of every person present, the horses, wheels of carts, everything. Alicia suppressed a frightening sound. Now, the scary part. Will said, more to everyone around him than Alicia. Will clapped his hands in front of him, and a sound that Alicia could only describe as the hammer of the gods striking the earth echoed through the air. Alicia looked for Will and saw him slowly sinking into the sand, and slowly she started to sink as well. Will locked eyes with her as he got to his shoulders. Remember. Breathe. Will said just as his mouth and head disappeared. Alicia struggled not to panic as the sand rose. First to her waist, then her chest, and just as the sand covered her mouth, Alicia shut her eyes and felt tears run down her face as she slipped into darkness. The Princess's Man, 7. Darkness was all Alicia saw. Naturally, she was holding her breath, but then she remembered what Will had said. I just need to breathe. She thought and took a hesitant breath, finding she was able to breathe just fine in the inky blackness which surrounded her. She took deep breaths and focused on the fact she could breathe, and Will had assured her that everything would be okay. After what seemed like an eternity, she felt the sand shift above her, and suddenly her head was free of the sand, and dim light hit her eyes, blinding her for a moment. When she finally adjusted, she saw that the rolling hills of the kingdom were long gone, and the deep forest and towering trees of the Fey woods now surrounded her. What also surrounded her were the faces of 30 orcs, all of whom held strange crossbows leveled at her. All around Ilika, the Drati, horses, and carts emerged from the sand. With each appearance, the orcs around her seemed to relax. Finally, Will, Elon, and Gotro emerged from the sand, and relief seemed to wash over the faces of the orcs surrounding the elf stones. Will stepped out of the elf stones, and the facade of magic rolled back over him. Alicia walked quickly after him, not wanting to be too far from him. When she finally stood next to Will once more, she breathed easier. I remembered to breathe. Will, what the hell was that? How did we transport here? Why does no one else use the elf stones to travel? Alicia said, questions pouring from her mouth as fast as her mind could formulate them. Hold on there, Alicia, Will said, sounding drained. I will answer all of your questions, but I need some food first. Alicia looked at Will and saw the exhaustion in his eyes. Are you okay? Alicia asked. Will nodded, leading her to follow after Elon and Gotro. As they walked, Will returned the salutes of many orcs, Drati, and elves that crossed their path. Yes, I will be fine after I eat. Having the restrictions I have placed on myself ripped away and then reinstated is jarring, to say the least. This statement only raised more questions for Alicia, and she turned to look at the elf stones to see Sir Balefur being helped out by one of the Drati. Are you all right, Sir Balefur? She asked as the pair followed behind them. The Drati spoke while a very pale Sir Balefur nodded. We had to revive him. I think he tried to hold his breath the whole time we were under. The sands of the loch kept him alive, but he was out cold when we emerged. Alicia nodded sympathetically to Sir Balefur and then turned to face the roar of a crowd. Gotro had led them all to a large building directly opposite the elf stones. Up on the front porch of the building, Gotro had raised his hands and bellowed out a call. Kem na loch og. The response by the crowd was a roar of approval. It sent shivers down Alicia's spine. She knew the Gobran was generally thought to be made up of fanatics, but this was the first time she had seen it in person. Alicia also looked across the crowd to see Will had not been lying when he said that most humans were prudish by comparison. Several Orcish women stood in hide pants with little more than a strip of leather around their chests. There were also elvish men and women who had a few precariously placed leaves protecting them from the elements. Elon stepped back next to Alicia as Will stepped up next to Gotro. Elon quietly translated for Alicia as Gotro continued speaking. Gotro looked across the crowd. It is good to hear the roar of the clans once more. Months spent in travel, and we return with guests. First Will is here. The crowd erupted, and Alicia's ears turned red at how loudly the women of all races cheered at Will's wave to the crowd. Gotro continued, we also have 2 guests from our allies in the Colt Kingdom, the Princess, Alicia Terrace Coltshelg, and Sir Balefur, Captain of the Royal Guards. While they are here, Sir Balefur will study combat, and Princess Alicia is Malek Nagaro. Alicia looked at Elon, who was giggling quietly. Alicia also saw Will shake his head in embarrassment at his grandfather. What did he say? Alicia asked. Elon smiled at Alicia, here in the Gobran, the safest you can be is to be part of our family, so he named you Malek Nagaro. Malek Na means soon to be, and Garo means taken or acquired, and it also has a, shall we say, dirty meaning. So essentially, he just declared you will soon be taken by Will, in every way it implies. Alicia turned bright red and looked out over the crowd once more. It shocked her how many female faces shone toward her with sheer anger on them. Alicia muttered to herself, they don't look like they want to be friends. No, they don't, but I also don't think they intend to harm you. A few of them probably intend on trying to bed you along with Will, and the rest most likely intend on becoming a second wife or concubine. Elon said all this with a thoughtful look on her face as her eyes washed over the crowd. Her eyes finally settled on an orc woman who was wearing form-fitting leather which left very little to the imagination. The look on her face also left little to the imagination as she glared daggers at Alicia, now she might actually try something. She was Will's Ogdashi, and she had it in her mind she was to be his wife, or at least the first of them. Alicia nodded glumly. She realized that both Elon and Gotro were trying to push them together, and she wanted it to happen, but she wished it was more organic in its happening. Alicia shook her head as something Elon had said registered with her. Wait, what? First wife? Elon, who had given up on translating Gotro's speech, turned and looked at Alicia. Oh, yes, another thing humans are strange about. You may have as many husbands or wives as you wish in the Gobron, though it tends to be strong men with multiple wives, though there are a few women with several husbands. When people started to realize just how powerful and capable Will really was, leaders of the clans began to parade their daughters in front of him, hoping he would take an interest. Alicia thought of this for a moment, processing the idea of potentially having more than one husband or of having to share her husband with another woman. Alicia shook her head. Well, here is to hoping that she does not succeed. Gotro finished speaking and turned to enter the large building they were all standing in front of. As they finished entering, two Drati shut the doors behind them. Now, Gotro said, let us go to bed, and in the morning, we can finalize plans for the coming days. One of the Drati was still helping Sir Balfour, who looked to have regained most of his color, and Yolanda and Gotro disappeared up the stairs, leaving Alicia and Will alone in the entryway. Come on, let's eat, then I'll answer all the questions you have. Will said and led Alicia down a flight of stairs to a kitchen with a Drati cleaning some pots and pans. Will made them both food, and they ate it at a small table set in an alcove at the back of the kitchen. After Will had finished eating, he sighed. Sitting back and wiping his mouth, he finally spoke. Okay, so what questions do you have? So what happened with the Elfstones? Please explain in detail. Alicia said, bursting with other questions, but she could still see the exhaustion in Will's eyes. Will took a breath and then began speaking. The Elfstones are, well, to be quite honest, the Elfstones are a focusing of power unlike any other. The stones and white rings inside them are a product of Gilsharibram bone and blood magic. And inside the ring of stones, that black sand is what is known as the Sands of Balak. Balak was a magical beast that volunteered to be a part of the Elfstones. Will glanced over at Alicia and saw confusion. Put simply, the Elfstones, all of the Elfstones ever assembled, are all part of a massive living organism that feeds off of magical sources, aka me when we traveled here. Alicia's eyes widened. So then when you spoke of limitations being stripped away and reapplied, you were actively using the magic you sealed? Yes, Will said, while inside the Elfstones, magical power that is not part of the operation of the Elfstones is sealed, and magic that is a part of their operation is unsealed. If you have as much magic as I do, it becomes an ordeal unto itself to seal and unseal it. Alicia nodded, watching as Will leaned forward to take a drink of water. Alicia asked a few more questions about the Elfstones before moving on to what Gotro had said. So, Will, your grandmother explained what Malakna Garo means. Will's face went bright red, making Alicia smile. I am sorry he said that, but it does provide you a level of protection. If people believe you are a potential wife, then if something happens which prevents me from doing my job as the princess's man, many in the clans will step forward to protect you if you need it. Alicia nodded. I understand. I think that is all I want to know for the night. Will stood and led her to a set of conjoined rooms on the top floor of the building. After making sure that the rooms were clear of threats, Will bid Alicia farewell and retired to his own room. Alicia lay awake for a short while, wondering what other events awaited her on the Marrow. The princess's man ate. The next morning Will rose early and thought about everything that had happened since the last time he was in the Gobran. He remembered how he had left the Gobran last time with rage in his heart. How he had vowed to kill the king and how he had planned to kill the entire royal family. Oh, how things changed. And how fast they changed. Will thought to himself as a sleepy-looking princess emerged from her room and nodded blearily to Will. Will nodded to her and followed her until she stopped. Will, Alicia said, her tone carrying a note of exhaustion, please show me where I can bathe. I just realized I don't know where that might be. Will smiled and took the lead, walking down the stairs and out the front door. Alicia hesitated and then followed him outside, still in her nightgown. A female Drati seemed to materialize next to Alicia. Let me take that for you, princess. She said in a tone mirroring the princess's in regards to sleepiness. Thank you, the princess said, handing the woman her bathing things. They continued walking, and Alicia noticed there were a goodly number of people all heading the same way. When they got to the supposed destination, Alicia froze. What is this? Alicia asked, watching men and women alike go into a low building. It is a bathhouse. Will said, making to follow everyone in, but stopped when Alicia placed a hand on his arm. Can you please explain? Alicia said, confused as she had only ever used the castle baths. You and Mila here will go into the women's side, and I will go into the men's side, and you will relax and enjoy your bath as you normally do. Will said and gave her a gentle push to follow after Mila before turning and disappearing into a separate door that only men were entering. An hour later, Will sat patiently waiting outside the bathhouse and Alicia and Mila approached. Alicia looked strangely refreshed and drained at the same time. Alicia, what happened? We ran into. Alicia started and was cut off by an Orcish woman stepping in between Will and Alicia and firmly planting her lips on Will's. She pulled back after a few moments of assaulting Will's tongue with her own. It's good to see you again, Will. Agrana, it's good to see you as well. Will said stiffly, gently pushing the female orc away. If you will excuse us, we have business to attend to. Why, Agrana said, placing her body, loosely wrapped in a towel, firmly against Will's body. Maybe if you ditch the princess here, we can find some real fun? Her hand slid under the loosened strings of Will's pants and gently caressed his manhood. Will saw Alicia's face turning a bright red. While he was not opposed to what Agrana was suggesting, he did not approve of how Agrana was trying to use this against Alicia. And deep down, something had been repulsed when Agrana suggested he ditch the princess. While I appreciate your offer, I am not interested. Have a good day. Will turned and followed Alicia, who had been urged forward by Mila. Without turning back, she began speaking to Will in a smooth flowing language that Alicia could only assume was the Drati tongue. Will said in a tone Alicia could only call disapproving. So you have met my Ogdashi, and she was apparently quite rude. Yes, quite. Alicia said, thinking back to the rude woman and how she had introduced herself and immediately began mocking the apparently soft-mannered princess. Will and Alicia spent the remainder of the morning getting food and setting people to gather supplies for the trip to the north. By about midday, all the required supplies had been gathered, and Sir Balefur was once again voicing his opposition to Will and Alicia traveling alone. Princess, I still do not think that the two of you traveling alone is a wise idea. If I could just, Sir Balefur said and was cut off. Sir Balefur, as we have already discussed 10 times today, you will remain here to train under an Ogdashi while Will and I travel to make contact as we have been requested to do. The princess outlined this and walked away, finding Will packing the supplies into a large sack. Once they were all inside the sack, he pulled the drawstring and as the mouth of the sack closed it shrank down to the size of a large coin purse. Alicia was stunned, and quietly Ilan laughed gently next to her. It's quite amazing what we produce here in the Gobran, isn't it? It is. Alicia said and felt Ilan press a small stone into her hand. What is it, Ilan? Think of it as a safety measure. If things should go wrong, throw that stone as hard as you can into the ground, and you will find yourself protected by a strong barrier for a day. Ilan smiled at Alicia. I hope you do not have to use it, but if you need it, do not hesitate. Ilan left Alicia to think and then moved to say her goodbyes to Will. They departed quickly, heading deeper and deeper into the dimly lit woods. They seemed to travel for hours, and not once did they see any beasts or monsters. When the last rays of light faded to a point that Alicia felt that she would begin tripping over herself, Will called for a halt. Let's rest here for the night. Will said and quickly set about starting a fire and getting a tent set up. Alicia was nervous. Never before had she shared sleeping quarters with a man who was not family. She knew that Will would most likely not start anything, but she was having difficulty deciding if she wanted to start things herself. These thoughts continued until Will finally handed her a plate of smoked venison and some fire-grilled vegetables. Will sat next to her, chewing his food and finally speaking. So, what has you so worked up? Nothing, Alicia said, thinking quickly, just about your Ogdashi, and if Sir Balefur will be all right. Will laughed and nodded. It is a worry, but if anything, I think we might want to worry about him acquiring a taste for his Ogdashi, or his Ogdashi acquiring a taste for him. You would know about that. Alicia said, and then what Will had said sank in. Wait, are Ogdashi expected to sleep with their students? No, Will said, taking a bite of veggies, but among the Orcish culture, sex and combat are almost synonymous with each other. It is the reason that strong fighters tend to have their pick of partners. Alicia's mind ran. That explains why Agrana was so mad. To her you picked weak little me. Will nodded in silence as he continued eating. A thought seemed to cross his face as he spoke again. You know there is nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with what? Alicia said, confusion permeating her voice. Nothing wrong with being you. Will said. You may see it as weak, but I am sure there are situations you could handle with ease while both Agrana and I would flounder with them. Alicia felt the blood rush to her cheeks. Thank you, Will. Will smiled and stood up, walking to the pot for more food. Not a problem at all, Princess. It's just what I believe. Alicia thought for a moment. You have a lot of strange beliefs. What was the thing you said to my father? Walk like the king or, she trailed off. Will laughed. Walk like you are the king, or like you don't give a fuck who is. He smiled, remembering his father attempting to explain Earth's strange history to a child who would have never been born there. I think I understand that one, but what are some of the other things that your father taught you? Alicia asked, working on her first bowl. She was waiting for a response and looked up to see Will staring absent-mindedly into his second bowl of soup. She realized that she may have crossed a line. Will, I'm sorry. I didn't think. It's fine. It really is. I just forget sometimes that he isn't coming back. Will said and then laughed harshly. You would think that as a grown man, I could remember these things. I just really miss him. Alicia was silent, as was Will. After several minutes, Will finally spoke again. He was funny. Not like a jester or anyone who is funny professionally, but in a way that would make you groan. I believe he called them dad jokes. He taught me a lot, more than I had a right to learn. He used to tell me, if you can't laugh at yourself, who can you laugh at? That seems kind of harsh. Alicia said. When I first heard it, I thought so too. Will said. But honestly, I think I get it now. He was telling me I need to be able to laugh at myself, laugh at the mistakes I make, as well as laugh with my friends and family at the mistakes they make, the mistakes I make, and the mistakes we make together. Alicia mulled that thought over as she finished her food and Will went for thirds. He sounds like a very intelligent man. She said finally, staring somewhat in awe of the sheer amount of food Will was shoveling into his mouth. Will nodded and swallowed, taking a sip of water from his skin. He firmly believed every mistake, every memory, every experience had something to teach us. And now I am older, I appreciate how he was trying to prepare me for a world that he actually knew very little about. Alicia looked at the giant sitting across from her. She liked Will, he was everything he had just described in his father, and he was kind and incredibly capable. And because of that, the pained look on his face hurt her down to her very soul. I know I never knew your father, but I think he would be proud of you, Will. Alicia surprised herself and Will then by standing up and walking over to Will, and giving him a hug. She had never been so bold and was panicking. She panicked even more when Will let out a pained chuckle and hugged her back. Squeezing her to him, she could feel the ripple of his muscles and knew that if he chose to, he could crush her with little effort, but she also felt a tender gentleness which made her feel safe and protected. They held each other for a moment. Will accepted the unspoken support Alicia was offering, and Alicia floated on a cloud of bliss, wrapped in the blanket of muscle that was Will's embrace. Will finally stepped back from her. Thank you, Alicia, I needed that. While elves and orcs are more than happy to comfort me in other ways, they do little to fulfill the human need for basic contact and support. Alicia laughed at this and nodded, smiling up into Will's eyes. Well, any time that you need it you let me know. They sat for a while longer, talking of many things, until Will finally banked the fire and stood. We should get some rest, we still have a long ways to go, and it will only be longer if we get a late start. Alicia nodded and stood, walking with Will to the small tent. She recognized that if she were to be sleeping in the tent alone, it would be quite spacious, but Will's massive frame quickly ate the available space. She watched Will take 2 long knives and stick them under his pillow, one handle sticking out from either side. Then he looked up at her and stepped back outside. Please go ahead and get changed. I will wait outside. Alicia thanked him and did just that. When she was changed, she pulled the flap of the tent back and admitted a now shirtless Will. I hope you don't mind, he said, I have difficulty sleeping with a shirt on. Not at all. Alicia said, the blood rushing to her face. She really didn't mind, but she also was doing everything in her power to keep her eyes from roaming across the vast expanse of his chest. She shook herself mentally. Well, good night, Will. Good night, Alicia. Will said, closing the tent flap and laying down on his back next to her. Alicia closed her eyes, she could quite literally feel the heat that radiated from Will, and she wondered if she would be able to sleep. In moments she had drifted off to sleep, and Will found that he quite liked it when Alicia snuggled into the side of his body. The Princess's Man 9. When Alicia came to, the first thing she noticed was how incredibly warm she was, despite the cold of the morning air nipping at her nose. The second thing she noticed was Will's massive arm wrapped around her, allowing her head to rest on his shoulder as they lay. His other arm wrapped across the front of her body, so one of his massive hands lay on Alicia's hip. Her initial response was panic. Then she heard the deep breathing, letting her think Will was still asleep. Alicia tempered her reaction. Instead, she turned to lie more fully on his arm so she could see Will. She knew now why she was warm. Heat radiated from his body, making the tent they were in almost too warm. Alicia leaned into Will, enjoying the moment. "Good morning, princess," Will said, startling the young woman who was very much enjoying snuggling. Alicia's reaction made Will smile. Alicia seemed to freeze, looked up into Will's eyes, and jumped into the air. She landed on her feet and seemed to freeze once more. "Will. When did you?" Will smiled at the now furiously blushing and thoroughly flustered princess. "When did I wake up? Or are you really asking, did I see when you leaned into me earlier?" Alicia could not respond and simply made a gulping sound as if she were desperately attempting to drink all the air around her so she would not hear the answers to those questions. Will continued speaking with a smile, "As far as when I woke up. I never went to sleep. I am responsible for your safety, so until we reach the next town, I will not sleep. And yes, I did see you lean into me." Alicia said nothing and simply walked out of the tent. Will smiled and then felt his stomach drop when Alicia spoke next, panic permeating her voice. "Will." Will moved, and seemed to materialize in front of her. She forgot how incredibly fast he was. She looked out at the 6 hooded figures seated around their camp, noting weary body language. One of the 6 stood, its robes and hood hiding its appearance entirely. It bowed to Will and began speaking a language Alicia did not recognize. Will listened for a moment and seemed to relax as one of the other hooded figures waved a hand at the banked fire, sending it springing to life. "It's all right, Alicia. They are Gumbari," Will said, and Alicia understood why Will seemed so relaxed. Gumbari were a strange people. They were fierce and determined, but they also adhered to some of the most intense cultural rules Alicia had ever heard of. There were many, but generally, unless you did something to greatly anger a Gumbari, you were safe around them. Sometimes they would even come to your aid, so long as it did not violate another of their rules. Alicia went back into the tent, preparing for the coming day. She listened as Will sat and talked quietly in the strange language with the Gumbari. The Gumbari cooked for them, producing food and drink seemingly from air. After Will had packed the tent and spoken some final words with the Gumbari, he pulled Alicia to the side and had her face away from the fire pit where the Gumbari were gathering. "Don't look back," Will said, facing the same direction as her. "Let them finish. They will say something when they are done." Moments later, a voice unlike anything Alicia had heard spoke in what could only be described as a muddy tone. "Thank you." When they turned around, the Gumbari were gone, and any evidence of the small fire pit or any damage they may have caused to the forest seemed to have vanished without a trace. Alicia was stunned. What happened? The Gumbari happened. If you treat them appropriately and respect their rules and ways, they do these kinds of things. Will said, "I asked one once how they do it. Apparently, they quite literally feed off of the damage a fire causes to the earth and general damage to the forest." "And where did you learn that language?" Alicia asked Will. "There is an old Gumbari couple who live in the Gobran. They take care of several things for my grandfather, and in return the Gobran and its people do their best to abide by several rules regarding the forest and nature," Will said as he made sure their bags were secure and slung them on his back. "Interesting," Alicia said and fell into step next to Will as they headed off through the woods. Several hours went by in quiet conversation, and as they were both feeling they should stop for food, voices drifted to them through the forest. Will and Alicia stopped to listen. "Of course I'm sure. It's what the Gumbari said. There are only 2 of them, and one of them is a woman." A gruff voice holding a note of command chimed in. "Good, all right, lads, get into position. We need to welcome our guests properly." The laughs of an untold number of men followed. Without warning, Will gestured for Alicia to wait. He melted into the woods. Moments later, Alicia heard Will's voice sound out from near the group of men. "So, lads, what seems to be the plan?" Will said, his tone carrying that playful note of danger Alicia had come to know. The next thing that Alicia heard could only be described as a clamoring ruckus. She rushed forward, forgetting Will had asked her to wait. It didn't dawn on her what she had done until she was already clearing the tree line. Luckily Will had things well in hand. Even in the scant moments it took Alicia to find her way through the trees, only one of the apparent brigands was still standing. "What? Who? Who are you?" the man asked as he shrank back from the mountain of flesh that had apparently just steamrolled through his friends. "I am Wilgaro, and I am one of the two who you were waiting for," Will said, and then caught sight of Alicia, "and here is the other. So tell me, where do you have the Gumbari? Did you detain them or something else?" "Back that way," the man said, coming up short against a tree and gesturing behind him. "Anyone who travels the forest knows not to hurt the Gumbari." "Good," Will said, smiling. "Well, you have a good day then. We will be leaving and letting the Gumbari free." Alicia walked quickly past the man, and Will stepped to match her pace as she passed him. After they had untied the hands of the Gumbari and broken the line of iron nails laid around them, the Gumbari promised to make it up to them and disappeared. Alicia followed in silence, thinking about how quickly Will seemed to deal with things, especially when it was a matter of combat. "Will, can I ask you something?" "Sure," Will said, leading the way. "How do you deal with large numbers of people with such ease?" Alicia asked. "Well, it is a combination of things, but the two I think make it so easy are the fact people in groups tend to overestimate the group and underestimate individuals, and most people feel fighting is something structured. I treat fighting as a cold and calculated application of violence to achieve a goal." Will said all this with a casual tone which made Alicia shiver with how easily the words flowed from his lips. "Thank you," Alicia said, grateful for the simple answer to what could have been an incredibly complex question. They both turned their efforts to walking. Will saw the sun setting and told Alicia to push on. They were almost to the town. 2 hours after sunset, they finally arrived at the gate of the small town, no more than a collection of 10 buildings. The inn was expecting them and had 2 conjoining rooms waiting. As they prepared for bed, Alicia was saddened she would not be able to snuggle up to Will. She thought about this for a while and finally steeled herself, knocking on his door. The door between their rooms opened almost instantly, Will standing there shirtless with a knife in either hand. "Is everything all right, Alicia?" Alicia nodded, and Will relaxed. The knives seemed to disappear from his hands. Alicia barely managed to squeak the words out, "Can I ask a favor?" Will smiled at her and nodded. Alicia opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She felt as if her face was going to melt, it was so hot. She stood there for a moment, her jaw working as her brain tried to figure out what she was trying to say, then she panicked and turned to close the door. "Alicia, why don't you come in and have a seat?" Will said. Alicia looked up at his face and knew Will understood exactly why she had knocked on his door. Alicia nodded and walked into his room. Alicia sat on the bed and Will locked the doors behind her, handing the key to Alicia. "So, I am tired, and you look tired as well. I am going to lie down and go to bed. You are welcome to do what you like." Will lay down on his side of the bed, which to Alicia felt like a massive thing, barely containing his massive frame. The sliver of mattress remaining unobstructed by his body seemed designed for her as Alicia lay down with her back to Will. Unbidden, a sigh of contentment escaped Alicia's lips. Will chuckled quietly to himself, and Alicia felt her heart leap into her throat when a massive arm snaked around her body to pull her close to the rock-solid wall of muscle behind her. Alicia thought she might die when she felt Will's hot breath on her neck. "Good night, princess," Will said, and then gave into a small portion of the lust coursing through his body, and kissed her on the back of her neck. She arched her back, pushing her hips back, and turning her head so that he could see her eyes. In that moment, both of them knew they would not be getting much sleep this night.